Nationwide protests are taking place at the moment in Nigeria over worsening economic hardship. Let's take a look at
these. This is currently the situation in Nigeria, as thousands of citizens took to the street to carry out nationwide protests against the Tinubu-led administration. The demonstrations are fueled by grievances such as insecurity and inflation, with some holding Tinubu accountable for the nation's economic challenges. But is this really true? To fully analyze and answer this question, let's take a look back in history. It is important to note that Nigeria's problems began way back before our independence from the British colonial masters in 1960. In the 1950s, the country was ruled through indirect means by the white men. This literally means electing local rulers and government officials while ruling from the shadows. They imposed huge taxes on masses, and anyone who didn't comply were either arrested, beaten, or even locked up at times. This hardship continued until Nigeria was proclaimed a country and granted self-rule starting from 1960. The early Nigerian leaders were civilians of different ethnic groups, with each fighting for the betterment of their regions rather than the collective gain of the country. The Northerners, who wielded the most power at the time, were accused of appointing their tribesmen into key governmental positions and were therefore violently overthrown in 1966 by military officers who were mostly Igbos. The subsequent leader, a military dictator, Agui Aronsi, was also killed months later. Then another military ruler assumed power in the same 1966. That was Yakubu Gowon. These dictators barely understood how to run a country. They have limited knowledge on how to maximize a country's income. General Yakubu Gowon famously said something about Nigeria's problem not being money, but how to spend it. He uttered those words at a time when the surging price of oil was multiplying federal income faster than sensible spending could catch up with it. For some context, Nigeria's oil revenues more than doubled in the 8 months between September 1973 and May 1974. Thus began an era of corruption in the country, as politicians were after their personal gain. Gowon was also booted out of power in 1975. Murtala Mohammed then took over from him, but was killed less than 7 months later in an abortive coup of February 13, 1976. Nigeria's foreign policy under Mohammed throughout the 6 months that he was head of state was a sight to be seen. It was Nigeria at her proudest and her best. He purged thousands of both military and civilian officials. Subsequently, Nigeria then switched back to a civilian rule in 1979 under Shehu Shagari. The oil-rich nation's economy suffered from a sharp drop in global crude oil prices. Then on December 29, 1983, Shagari announced austerity measures in a country already suffering from high unemployment rate and general disillusionment after the oil boom of the 70s. Shagari's administration was also marred by corruption scandals. On New Year's Eve in 1983, a group of military plotters toppled his government, describing Shagari's administration as inept and corrupt. Buhari, then a military officer, took over the nation. During his military rule, Buhari significantly derived charismatic authority. In 12 months as the head of state, about 500 politicians, officials, and businessmen were reportedly jailed for alleged corruption. Buhari was also overthrown, and this time by his chief of staff, Ibrahim Babangida. Babangida's government found pleasure in looting the national treasure to enrich himself, his friends, and families. Ibrahim Babangida's regime was unable to give an account of the Gulf War oil windfall, which has been estimated to be $12.4 billion. Following the annulment of the June 12, 1993 presidential election, presumably won by Moshood Abiola, a national protest ensued, which forced Babangida to step aside and hand over power to Ernest Shonekan on August 27, 1993, as the head of an interim national government. Weeks later, Abacha staged a coup, returning Nigeria to military rule. Living under Abacha was harsh, unless you were directly connected to those in power. It was a time when many individuals couldn't afford kerosene and had to resort to using sawdust stoves despite Nigerians' abundant reserves of crude oil. Abacha stole more than $4 billion, the majority of which came from Nigeria's oil resources. Nigeria transitioned back to democracy in 1999 after years of military rule. Olusegun Obasanjo, the newly elected president, was accused of selling the country's refineries cheaply. The Kaduna and Port Harcourt refineries were sold for $750 million, much lesser than their true value. Oil unions protested, claiming the refineries were worth over $5 billion, leading to a strike. When President Musa Yar'Adua assumed office in 2007, one of the key challenges his administration faced was the rising cost of living, including the soaring price of fuel. In response, they implemented a subsidy program to lower fuel prices, reducing the pump price of petrol from 75 to 65 naira per litre. This move eased the tension on Nigerians by providing relief from the impact of high transportation and goods costs. After sweeping to power with a vast majority of the votes during the 2011 presidential election, it didn't take long before the Goodluck Jonathan presidency began to unravel. Under his watch, many militant leaders from the oil-producing Niger Delta area in the south became very rich from government patronage and contracts. Some of them were even awarded security contracts to guide the oil installations they once protested against and attacked.
I belong to everybody and I belong to nobody.
When Muhammadu Buhari made this iconic speech during his inauguration in 2015, everyone thought he was the long-awaited messiah. His selling point was no to corruption. During his presidency, oil revenue plummeted to an all-time low, which was a major economic mismanagement challenge. His administration must, however, be commended for initiating oil sector reforms. It is also to his credit that he insisted on growing the food the nation consumes internally. To encourage consumption of local rice, he had to shut borders and got the central bank to support internal food production. The strategy paid off, but for challenges of insecurity, especially in the northern, eastern and middle belt farmlands, Nigerians now relish eating their homegrown rice in an unprecedented quanta. Towards the end of his administration, Buhari changed the nation's currency. Spending their own money felt like a crime to Nigerians. The currency swap efforts were a nightmare, causing excruciating pain. It ultimately took a Supreme Court intervention to rescue the nation. Tinubu then took over for Muhammadu Buhari. He removed fuel subsidy and also devalued the naira. The rationale behind the removal of fuel subsidy was that Nigeria could no longer sustain the financial burden of subsidizing fuel. By ending the subsidy regime, the government aimed to free up funds for investment in critical sectors such as infrastructure, healthcare, and education. Fuel subsidy removal led to an immediate sharp increase in fuel prices, which also led to a rise in the cost of living. This made it hard for many workers to afford daily transportation. So, dear viewers, who do you think is truly responsible for Nigeria's problems? Drop your opinions by using the comment section. Thanks for watching.